Heyo everybody, XEI here for a special vlog. This one is support material, I suppose, for the Pokemon Tabletop RPG campaign that's currently running on the AngelArts YouTube channel. Session 1 will be released soon. We're recording Session 2 tomorrow. I wanted to get my thoughts out on Session 1 before playing Session 2, just because I don't want some of that mixing in with this. So generally, AngelArts runs these vlog episodes after his sessions, but because all the players are across a very broad time zone range, it just doesn't allow for us to stay that extra hour and record the vlog together. We do miss a little bit of that back and forth that can happen in those exchanges. Maybe we'll figure something out in the future, but right now we're each just recording our thoughts down in an independent vlog, and we'll see what happens in the future. So I wanted to get my thoughts down, like I said, and there's a lot of notes I've written down on the first 4 episodes of Session 1. I'm going to try to boil it down to broad things I want to very quickly touch on, and then what I might do is actually just respond in the comment areas for the session episodes on the AngelArts channel with some of these other thoughts I have going on, just so that it could keep this video a little bit tighter. It could also keep the dialogue happening on AngelArts' channel, where that community is going to be watching these sessions. And so I would encourage anybody who's on this channel, if you like tabletop, if you want to see something different, especially the approach to the Pokemon world, or a different approach to the game world of Pokemon, it's a very grounded, slice of life, episodic, role-playing game, so story-centric tabletop experience. It's more of a collaborative storytelling show more than it is a tabletop game. So it's not very dice heavy. It's a lot more just people interacting with each other, improvising with each other in a tabletop fashion, but still it's a lot of just, even Hark seems like he's improvising as he goes. That'll be one of the comments I make right now. I'll just open it up with that. The fact that we roll our initiatives to start our scenes off, it adds a little bit of that dynamic of just the unknown, the unexpected in the storytelling exercise. I find that pretty intriguing because I would imagine that Hark's got some notes about what he wants to happen, but it's the idea that even he has to kind of be nimble with what's going on, and he does it very well. What else do I want to talk about? So I talked about really quickly about the world that's a little bit different. It's that slice of light ground. So what's great about the character lineup right now is that you have characters like Chase, the character I'm playing, which has, and Molly, which is the first scene that opens up the series. It's a very kind of emotional, deeper scene that, it goes to a part of the story that it just has a little bit more of that emotional grind to it, if you will. I don't even know how to explain this really well. But then you have this other spectrum where, each of them to a certain degree have a side to them that it's very mysterious. It's not really talked about. It's something that's hidden in their past. And so, but it feels like that hasn't really affected who they are in their everyday life. Like Tiffany, Noir will still go to her to the barista, to the cafe, and she'll still serve coffee. She'll still go about those motions, even though she wears a psychic pin that designates her as a risk to society, I suppose. I don't know. It's a psychic pin. It's color-coded based on your risk rate, I suppose, your threat. So I think that's a very intriguing concept to add to a world like this, because it kind of makes you feel like they're segregated a little bit, and they're treated a little bit like mutants. That's kind of how I see it right now, or mages in Dragon Age. And then you have Cassie on the other side, who has this like dark history with Team Rocket, but she has a front. She has a front of being this normal person who's getting an apartment with Noir, and there's this past that she's trying to keep hidden. At least presumably, I would hope so. And she just works at a Quickie Mart, and she just punches the things through the register and pushes it out the door and helps run the shop, right? But that history is still there, and it's sort of hidden. And then you have the other range where you have the Tiffany, where it's really slice of life. The character itself is, so far from what I can tell, is made up of very I don't even know how to describe it. It's like nothing. She's not. It doesn't seem like she's hiding anything, I guess is what I'm trying to say. She's very surface. She if she's hiding anything, it's like she always puts on a smile because of customer service and whatnot. But she seems like a good person, and that's who she is on the surface, and that's who it seems like she is. Like, and I'll get a little bit into why the Chase thing. Actually, I'm going to get into it now. It's a good segue. So you have this spectrum of characters and personality types, and almost like tropes to a certain degree. And the reason why, and I'm going to focus on Chase here for a second. I feel like when episode 0 or even on my interview and the pitch and whatnot, I've always talked about Chase being like the super introvert, keeps to himself, doesn't really talk to many people, doesn't like draw attention to himself. And here we have like not so much the first episode where he's interacting with Molly, because that scene is sort of integral to his character, and I mean there's a lot of rich things that happen there that I feel like will kind of carry through the narrative. But the idea that then he has this exchange with Cobblestone Pete, and they have a camaraderie to a certain degree. They have a certain symbiotic relationship to a certain degree. And then he has this interaction with Tiffany later in episode 4 where she saves Lux, and so he comes off really kind to her, and then allows her to take him to buy him lunch, which is something like he wanted out of that. But from the Chase perspective, he's now interacting with someone who saved Lux, and so he feels obligated to owe Tiffany something. And so in his head, that's really kind of the motivation of why he stuck around and why he puts on the front of being not extroverted, but being social. And that's actually the act. So that's not his natural state. That's a state he goes into so that he has a way of being able to be that and then bail out if he has to, and then he can be his real self. But he puts on that front so that he doesn't make people uncomfortable and then have to deal with more confusion from people's uncomfortableness, if that makes sense. Anyways, that's how I'm kind of like, it makes sense in my head. But also because he has a Grimer. Here's a person who looks like she keeps herself well, and she's taking care of this thing that's almost the direct opposite of her natural state. And that initial read for Chase was very meaningful. It said something about her character and what she was, and the fact that she was willing to give of her to take care of this kind of Pokemon. And that's why he allowed the Grimer to get close, is that Chase sees the Grimer as, a Pokemon that needs to not be pushed away, and feels like maybe this is the kind of Pokemon that people keep pushing away. So that was kind of how that connection happened. So it's interesting how it lined up, because then it's like, oh, if she's going to go out with Felicity, then he can take care of this. And that's the obligation part of Chase saying he owes her at this point. So until he pays off that debt, he's going to keep a connection, and so that bridges into his connection with Felicity. He has a connection with Felicity. I think that much is obvious now after session 1, and he's friendly with her because he has a certain bond there between Cobblestone and a Felicity. It's like right now Chase has only been identified both by those he's given trust to and by those who like sort of trust him, or I say sort of because I don't know what Hark's going to throw at me. So it's the idea that that's kind of like, those are relationships that had already had a history to them. Whereas I think that the interesting thing for me with Chase is going to be in session 2, that first like bang interaction with the rest of the characters is going to be interesting, because he has to develop these relationships from scratch, and in an environment that feels very risky to him. It's the kind of scenario where his instinct is something's going down, and he needs to be in the opposite direction of this scenario. And so I'm curious to see how this is going to play out, because there's a lot of interesting pieces at play now, with some of the past of the characters and how they kind of connect and things like that. So okay, so let's move on. Let's roll back to scene 1 with Molly and Chase. I like the idea of the fact that they were at one point in the same orphanage, that they had some sort of history together, and within immediately meeting each other, there was some sort of connection there, maybe because of their psychology more than anything else, and seeing how that grows and seeing how that connects and how that plays out. I think that's a very interesting opportunity. I was actually, so that's a close, why this is interesting and why that scene was one of those, like, I couldn't have planned this. I didn't tell Hark to play this out, but it was one of those scenarios where it was very close to me because I was super introverted as a child. I was the kind of kid that very much stayed away from the groups of kids playing, in the clusters of joy. I was the person who found the sandbox, and the funny thing with that, the sand symbolism, is I distinctly recall, like, as a kid, I used to go to Portugal a lot. All my family's in Portugal, and so I would go there every 1 or 2 years, and we lived near the beach, and it was something I would do on the beach. I would either play with the sand, but one thing I always did was I would do that hourglass thing, so that sand clock thing, where I would just, like, I would spend time and time just watching sand kind of flow between my hands, and so that was like a flood of, like, that, the memory of just some of my past feelings and what Jet Black represented. And the funny twist here with Jet Black is that the kind of person I was, because I was so introverted and I was sort of like the Molly-ish kind of person. It was like a Molly / Chase to a certain degree. I would find ways of making friends with the selective bullies, and why I did that is because a bit of a survival instinct is that if I made friends with a with a selective bully, then that selective bully would protect me from the aggressive bullies. And the idea there is, I think Chase was sort of that selective, like, he can be a selective bully, and that's what I mean by selective bully, is that Jet Black would be the aggressive and Chase would be the selective, and I felt like a lot of those triggers were easy for me to, like, slip into and see how that would play out, because I was, like, drawn on some of those very old memories. So yeah, that's cool. Let's move on here. We got noir scene with the ribbon. I love the breakdown of what that means. I think I already talked about that I sort of compare it with, like, mutants or mages in Dragon Age, and I think that's going to open up a lot of interesting opportunities from a narrative standpoint, because, of course, when you're talking about any stories that involve characters that can control people, that can read minds, you're talking about a level of intrigue storytelling that you never quite know you don't have a reliable narrator, is what I'm saying. So you don't know who's really doing what, because anyone could be doing something for someone else. And this is in comics, this is in novels, this is in anything that has to do with mind stuff. You're pretty much, you can try to speculate as much as you want, but it's probably you're only gonna kind of piece everything together by the time you get to the end and you see how all of it comes together. And yeah, so it's curious to see how noir fits into that and how that world fits in, because there's that thing they were breaking up, it wasn't a riot, it was a demonstration they were breaking up on the TV. So it's obviously there's, like, a group of people who I almost think of like the biotics in Mass Effect, that in Mass Effect 1, I haven't played past that, so don't spoil me the comments. So yeah, so that idea of just people starting to rebel against kind of the society pushing them down, but of course the irony here is that the ones who are the good ones, the ones following the rules, the ones who wear the pin, those are the ones that aren't actually the risk to society. It's the ones who are the bad guys that don't follow the rules. They're not wearing the pins, or they found ways of, like, slipping into society and they're just pretending to be normal people. Those are the risks, but those aren't the risks that society is aware of, because they're busy putting down the ones who wear the pin. And so moving on, I thought it was fun to see Felicity appear in the Tiffany scene first, and see how that slice of life thing played out. You really got to see their personalities painted out in that very sort of everyday feel, which is, it feels good, because if you have a Chase scene or a Molly scene or a Cassie scene, or a noir scene, I guess we all have things we're hiding, but the Tiffany piece is always that part of the story that kind of brings things back. It's kind of the breather from all the other crap that the 4 other characters are hiding, and that is likely going to screw up Tiffany's life in one way or another. So I find that like that's one of the most intriguing things about this setup is Tiffany really is that she's like the Xander and Buffy, and I don't mean that in a powerless way, but I mean Xander was my favorite character in the Buffy series, and it's because you had all these fantastical things happening around him, but he was always the one who could see things in a different way, because he doesn't have all the baggage, or the baggage that he did have baggage, just like I'm sure Tiffany has baggage, but it wasn't overwhelmed by the supernaturally aspects or all of that other stuff. And that's why Xander was kind of special to me in the series. He always grounded things back into what is the problem and how am I reacting to it without all this other crap going around. So I love the potential of that dynamic between Tiffany and any of the 4 characters. But especially when all the secrets start to play out and she gets pulled into all of this stuff. Yes, the telltale timer. Oh man, so the idea of like chasing a monkey down the street that stole this bag from my buddy Cobblestone, it was basically everything you owned, and then having this decision of, do I chase after the monkey with the bag, or do I chase after the car with my Pokemon? And the decision I make, it almost feels like it's pseudo controversial, because I mean we're just starting, and it's like I'm willing to just say, there goes my Pokemon, whatever. But that's not. It was almost there's something else going on, and I'm sure it'll come out as Chase plays out scenes with Lux a little bit more, especially after the way that the session 1 ended. I think that relationship is going to get explored a little bit further, and why Chase. I'm not going to say why they made that, like why they were cool. Like I'm gonna let Lux come up with his own opinion of like what it meant to be left in that car. But the intention there was one of those. They have a mutual understanding that sometimes sometimes you are put into circumstances where you're going to be apart, and it's the idea. Chase's opinion is almost teaching Lux that to be self-sufficient, to be prepared to defend himself, to be prepared to hide and escape, and have all of those survival instincts to sort of help Lux overcome some of his insecurity issues and whatnot. So that'll be a very interesting thing to play out, I'm sure. But there's a dynamic there. I sort of like, that's what I turn to when I'm like, I need to get the bag for Cobblestone, because at the end of the day, I trust Lux to survive, and Chase trusted Lux to survive, and Chase trusts himself to find Lux again, and Lux find him. So that's always that will always happen, or at least that the goal of that, or the intention of that will always be in play. So moving on to Molly in the correctional facility, I like the idea that part of Molly's past was brought up, so there's the indication that she has sticky fingers, so she stole something. It's the idea that she's now made connections on the inside with people that could or could not have been released post-correction, and there's a sister and brother avenues, and there's this Sylvain guy. I wonder what he's all about. But a little bit scared there to see how that all plays out, because there's some scary stuff coming out of the whole Pokemon and person alignment, and I've got some theories on that. I'll probably leave those out of this vlog. A Remy debut and the ooh scene, and for me it was an interesting scene to play out, because I had a concept for Remy. Like, I thought, he's gonna be this hot-headed fox thing that has he's arrogant to a certain degree. He's very confident with himself, and I guess he cares about his coat. And so there's little details that happen when you get to improv through scenes and you're playing off of other people. Is you sort of you have to get into the head of the character quick and say things. And sometimes, the fun thing with role playing, especially when you kind of just let yourself role play instead of thinking too hard about how you're role playing, you come up with those happy surprises that start defining the character. And the special thing with all of the Pokemon is that none of us, we all figured out which Pokemon we were going to end up with in session 0. And so we might have had thoughts about what we were going to bring to the characters, but they weren't our Pokemons, and that's what makes it intriguing, is that you have to bring your own take to it, but you didn't put as much time into developing the Pokemon as you did your character. And so you have this scenario, I had this scenario where I gotta say something, I gotta play out the scene, so I came up with this thing of him liking his coat, like his keeping his coat clean, and that was more because, well, Ooh would have definitely messed up his coat. Like, come on, like he is a good looking dude, he's got, like, leave that coat pretty, you know. And so that's how it started. But then in my head, like, as when the scene was over, I was like, you know, the fun thing with characters is coming up with certain quirks, you know, and that you can fall back on, and that you can sort of piggyback on, and you can be this through line with the way you approach something, because it's not just about him liking his coat. There's a lot of depth behind it. It's not just him thinking his coat needs to be clean all the time. You can create emotional context behind why that is, like personality traits behind why that is, and I like exploring that, like exploring what's behind the phrases characters say is a very fun exercise. Let's move on. So I'll piggyback on that Remy scene with Ooh, and we'll just go straight to Act 3 with the Noir and Cassie scene. I'll say, like, that was one of those scenes where I feel like a lot more was going on than it seems. I think that there's something very interesting about Fabian and what he represents to the story. I like, just the idea of spectrum, the idea that he colors, right? So butterflies and the butterfly effect, and all these thoughts immediately went through my head, and I was like, oh geez, like, again, it was at the end of Act 3, and so there's like this, I feel like it was, okay, I'm not going to go too deep into what I'm thinking there, but I'm a big fan of narrative construction, having certain beats at certain times, and so I innately, sometimes to my detriment, because it sort of spoils things for me, I look for certain triggers, or at least I invent them, I create them, and that might be the case here because of the butterfly piece. So we'll see what plays out there. I like the scene between Remy and Fern from the perspective of not so much because I think it was a kind of a cute scene, and it kind of illustrates another aspect of Remy I didn't expect to come to light, like the trolley behavior. I didn't intend for it to come across trolly. There's something a little bit deeper to why Remy reacted the way he did to Fern trying to jump on the ledge. There's something more to what I was thinking when Remy did what he did there, and hopefully that gets explored a little bit further. But then also the idea of just establishing the independence of Remy versus the juxtaposition of the reliance that Fern has to Cassie. That's a huge, like, that's an awesome spectrum, right, of just personality types, and that's fun to explore because one of two things can happen, right? I mean, if those two characters interact enough, I mean, one's either going to influence the other is going to influence the other. So there's some interesting dynamics that can play out there. But what I liked about the scene more than the trolley kind of like cutie behavior was the way that Fern dropped a lot of very important plot details to Remy. And so as a player, I didn't want to react to any of those overtly right there, because I feel like Remy is with Noir for a reason, right? And I as a player, I still don't know how much Remy knows about what Noir's been through. I know as a player now that Noir had an Umbreon something. It was one of those black dog Pokemons. Like, I know she had another Pokemon, but I don't know if Remy knows that. I don't know if he knows the history behind what went south there, but he's with Noir for a reason. You know, I would like to think that Noir is likely keeping secrets. I think that might have come out in the interview or something, but I feel like that piece was given. And then Remy, I mean, that's the relationship he has with her, that he never gets the full story from the person who's his trainer. And so that relationship has created that independence in him to just, it's not even that he's not affected by it, but it's that nurturing is what sort of allowed Remy to develop that independent personality. And so I like the idea that with Fern kind of dropping these bombs, it's one of those, like, it's not like Remy doesn't think that Noir has her own sort of secrets that could be bombs, right? But it's almost like the less he knows and the less he involves himself with, then the less it becomes his problem. The less he needs to then deal with something that, you know, is going to mess up his coat. That sort of, so with the, I'm kind of being facetious there, but anyway, so with the Fern piece, it's like the R piece, he's like, I don't know how much Pokemon know of all of these things. I feel like, and that's why I had trouble, like, I'm like, do I acknowledge Remy knows what that is, or do I just let it roll right now and let's see how it develops? Because my idea, my gut reaction is that Remy maybe does know what that might be, and so he wants to keep that to himself. And so again, it's a bit of the training of, like, he is with Noir for a reason. And so if he has those details, he has something on Cassie. And that's really what it comes down to, is that there's this new person that's around Noir, and he feels like he's obligated to uncover secrets. And that's how I see Remy, is he holds secrets in and he uses them to his advantage. He doesn't necessarily share them because he doesn't want other people taking advantage of those secrets and then again pulling him into something he can't control. But he's very much a control freak. Again, he's with Noir for a reason. And I think, I'm interested to see how Noir's character develops in that regard. But I feel like her keeping the secrets she keeps, it's a control issue, and I feel like that's sort of like seeped into who Remy is. So anyways, so that's all I'm going to say about the Remy scene, and then that takes us to the Huxley scene, the J. Jonah Jameson of the Pokemon world, of a shipping package, a guy of anyways, great character. But the piece in that scene that I enjoyed the most was the fact that even after all the years, Molly can still be talked down to, so she can be, Huxley like overtly put her down and doesn't give her credit for any of the good jobs that her and Bullet do, and she just takes it. And whether that's an emotional defense or whether that's self-perception, I feel like it's been probably she was 8, so it's been like 12 years, I suppose, 14 years, and she still has that survival instinct even after the correctional facility. There's something that she's either built up that wall over those years, or I believe Molly did make a comment to this psychiatrist that was something like it was even before Whitestone. She already had defensive mechanisms in, whether that was the abandonment by the foster parents that abandoned her, and that's kind of what kicked it off, and then she became who she became, or if it was something before that even. Like, we don't know the history for Molly, so it'll be interesting to get into that. So every character has something that I find is very intriguing, that has a lot of potential to grow and evolve into more narrative juiciness. And I think that session 2 is going to be when a lot of these things come together, and that dynamic is really going to flesh itself out in unpredictable ways. And then of course we don't know how session 2 is going to end and what kind of stuff that's going to throw into the mix. There's all these other things, like there's the psychics, there's Prism Labs, which I didn't even get into with this vlog. The idea that, what happens when you shine a white light into a prism? Well, you get a spectrum of colors, right? And we already know that since the 50s, Spectrum Labs has been doing genetic modification on Pokemon that has influenced the Pokemon that exist today. So Pokemon with 6 powers instead of 4, something like that, which is what all our Pokemon have. So all our Pokemon are theoretically Pokemon that came from lineages of Pokemon that got genetically modified by Prism Labs. So that's going to have an effect, I'm sure of it. And then of course there's Team Rocket. So yeah, and then of course there's Sylvain Toro. And I'm going to wrap this up here. I think I could keep going on about this stuff. There was a lot. I mean, it was a 4.5-hour session, so always a lot of stuff to be said. And you know what? It's actually like recording vlogs as solo vlogs it actually increases the amount of content that people have to watch, because normally the vlog sessions were something like 30 to 40 minutes. So hopefully it's interesting and people enjoy them. But of course, having the bouncing ideas back and forth dynamically is also a pretty fun thing to plan for in the future. So that's it, guys. Don't forget to explore, engage, and inspire. Catch you around later. Peace, everybody.